The Admin and Finance Committee is called to order. Could I have a roll call, please?
Ms. Beebe? Here. Ms. Beebe is present. Mr. Bennett? Here. Mr. Bennett is present. Ms. Bofi? Here. Ms. Bofi is present. Ms. Bradford? Here. Ms. Bradford is present. Ms. Dastu? Here. Ms. Dastu is present. Mr. Garvey? Mr. Garvey is absent. Mr. Gill?
Present.
Mr. Gill is present. Ms. Hill? Present. Ms. Hill is present. Mr. Lee? Mr. Lee is absent. Ms. Orange Jones? Present. Ms. Orange Jones present. Mr. Romer? Mr. Romer is absent. You have a quorum.
Okay.
Your consent agenda is ready for approval. We are adding items 5.2 and 7.2. Move approval.
There's a motion to move for approval. Is there a second? Go ahead. Ms. Bradford seconded it. Okay, we have comment cards on 2.1 and 3.1, so we need to move those off the consent agenda. I'll need a motion to do that.
So moved.
Mr. Bennett moved and Ms. Dastu seconded. Is there any objection to that motion? Okay, so 2.1 and 3.1 are off the consent agenda. Okay, so we have a motion on the other items on the consent agenda, and there was a second. Is there any discussion on that item? Is there any objection? That motion passes. Next item.
Your next item is item 2.1, consideration of LDE contracts of $50,000 and under approved by the State Superintendent of Education on page 1. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive item 2.1?
So moved. Second.
Ms. Dastu, was that Ms. Bradford and Mr. Bennett seconded it? Okay, we have some. Is there any discussion before we go to public comment? Okay, Scott Hughes. Is Mr. Hughes here? No, I'm here, but so it's meant to be.
Oh.
Okay, Ms. Berrios.
Retired teacher, St. Tammany Parish. I quickly looked at some of the contracts that are being requested that BESE approve, and I just had some questions about some. Possibly you all are going to question them yourselves, but since you called on me. Two of them on the first page, Columbia University and Elstrop Moore and Honeywell. Contractor review interview materials for the course choice program. Both of these have to do with course choice financing. I would think that that would be pulled off at this particular time since the funding has been in question because of the lawsuit. On the next page, Finn Strategies, contractor will provide a strategy and framework for a statewide multimedia campaign for the Louisiana Department of Education's Louisiana Believe initiative. 100% state general fund, $48,000. I question what that is about. If it's just a public relations campaign, why? There needs to be an additional contract outside of the personnel with the Department of Ed for that. And then the last one, on the third page, $10,000 to the Faircloth Law Group. Counsel providing legal services to represent the Louisiana Department of Ed and the state superintendent in what appears to be an FOI lawsuit by Gannett, Barbara Leader and Gannett, which probably is about the refusal or the denial to be transparent to this particular news agency. So I had some questions about those and asked that you not approve those. Thank you.
Members, just to provide background information, these are, again, contracts under $50,000. For the Columbia University contract, The department was essentially conducting background research on the 96 applicants for course choice. These were in-depth background dossiers that were produced on every single provider. They also consulted at each step of the way on the process to review for accuracy, and then they're doing a post-mortem on the process as well so as to improve the course choice process this year. I would just highlight by saying this was literally thousands of hours of work for an extremely reduced rate. Elstrett, Maurer, and Honeywell, again, also under $50,000. Over the course of 3 months between May and August, the department recruited 10,300 applicants to the scholarship program, recruited 117 schools, vetted out another 10 to 15 schools, and enrolled those kids through an algorithm that was adjusted over the summer. That is an extraordinary lift, and this firm helped us to design some of the systems. The Fin Strategies LLC was in the absence of there being a communications director or a press secretary for the last 6 months. The department staffed this consultant to provide strategic consulting process in our Louisiana Believes campaign. This has essentially been almost the entirety of our communications function for that time. And with respect to the Faircloth Law Group, we were sued by Gannett over legal issues regarding the disclosure of public records. We have complied with all public records requests in front of us, and we also are not under the order that the court ordered as a result of the lawsuit from Gannett. That happened because of the work that we did with Faircloth. Unfortunately, people sue you, and you have to have lawyers, and you have to pay for them.
Any further discussion on item 2.1?
Yes, I have just a question. There's one contract on here about Eckers, and so one thing I would ask of the department is to look into how Eckers aligns with Compass and to make sure that we're not asking our teachers to do things that are contradictory. And so I know the contract's coming up. I think this is a good time as you're working on that contract to make sure that everything we have in place makes sense to our teachers. I was told by one of my constituents that one of her preschool teachers was having to satisfy different requirements on different days, and I know that that's not the intent of the department, so it's just something we can look into.
Thank you, Ms. Boakley. Good point. Any other discussion? Is there any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Yes.
The next item is item 3.1, consideration of a quarterly report of expenditures and budget balances of 8G projects for fiscal year 2012 and 13 on page 25. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive? So moved. Mr. Lee?
Second.
Second, Ms. Boakley. There are no public comment cards on this. They're actually for the next committee meeting. So is there any discussion on this item?
I'd just like to know what it is. This is our AG?
Yeah, that's our
Okay.
budget.
All right, I'm fine with it.
Any further discussion? Any objection to the motion? Motion carries. Next item.
The next item is item 4.1 on page 107, consideration of the discussion of the MFP formula. There are two recommendations, both to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive?
I'll make the motion.
Ms. Boakley? Second. Second by Mr. Lee. Is there any discussion?
Yes, Mr. Chairman. I guess the question is to the superintendent. Do we have any verbal report coming on the MFP this month?
Yes.
Superintendent White?
Yes, and I'd be happy to provide comment, Mr. Chairman. at
And
this-
maybe
at this
include
point.
what the board can expect for the next 3 months leading up to the final adoption in March.
Yes. Members, the Deputy Superintendent CNO and I have begun reviewing last year's MFP formula and the distribution of dollars. We've also taken into account study resolutions that were issued by members of the legislature with respect to the MFP, and we've taken comment from districts across the state with respect to finance issues. We've also been in conversation with legislative staff as well as with administrative staff regarding the state's current fiscal circumstance. I'll just report on a couple of items of study that we have undergone, and then members over the course of the next several months would like to bring back recommendations to you that get successively more granular, such that we can bring you more detailed information in January, hear your comment, and then provide ultimate formula recommendations in February. Number one, I think it is safe to say that the state's fiscal condition is dire. I recognize that's probably not news to anyone who reads the papers, but that is certainly all analysis we've done and feedback that we've gotten. There are items that we're hearing from school systems, and I'll call out one that have potentially some implications for the MFP, but certainly for their own finances. And most notably is how they classify students that are receiving free and reduced lunch, and that especially our most high poverty systems are asking us to take advantage of the federal government's more streamlined process, where you effectively lock in a rate of free and reduced lunch rate, so as to not have to go back and collect forms year after year, which if you've ever done before, you know is quite cumbersome. And that would have an effect potentially on the MFP, because it would allow districts to say, okay, at this moment in time, this represents the highest count excuse me, that I think I have of students who are receiving free and reduced lunch, which would translate into the MFP a relatively high number of kids who are declared at risk and thus receive the 0.2 weight within the MFP. So we are working with school systems on whether or not this process for streamlining their free and reduced lunch should be a consideration that we should allow them to take advantage of, and what that would mean for the MFP. We have, at the direction of the legislature, also been looking at the ramifications of the MFP on special education. There has been study resolutions provided to us, required of us on this issue. It's been a topic that's been put in front of the board before, and we have begun to notice some trends in special education that could potentially be linked to the funding and the way that we fund special education. Notably, that there are disparities in the following areas. One, there is a disparity in terms of the severity of the classifications from one system to the next. A pretty dramatic difference, meaning some parishes have very high concentrations of students classified with severe disabilities, others with quite mild disabilities. They're receiving the same funding weight on a per capita basis. Secondly, with respect to the movement of kids in and out of special education, some districts are driving their referral rates down. Some are staying relatively where they are or increasing. And clearly, given the state's priority of response to intervention, it would be ideal if referral rates were going down in all instances, but that's not necessarily supported by our funding formula. Finally, it's fair to say that the achievement rate of students with special needs is varied across parishes as well. That has something to do, in some cases, with the actual disabilities of the students, but it's clear that there are some inequities there. And in some respects, all of this is at least impacted, we think, by the funding formula. And so we will consider bringing to the board and being in discussions with the board, especially in light of the desires of the legislature, the extent to which special education is impacted by our formula, and whether there are changes that we should make to the way that we fund special education in our formula, such that we help to resolve some of those systemic issues. Mr. Chairman, I think that concludes where we are currently in our study, but I welcome questions from members.
Thank you, Superintendent White.
Mr. Superintendent White, I have an idea I'd like for you to think about, and if you believe it has merit, bring it back to the board. And also, what do you think the impact to the districts and formula might be, just as you're going to be hopefully letting us know what you think with the federal, using the federal definition for free and reduced lunch, what bottom line impact that would have, whether it would benefit the districts. And that is maybe considering to, now that we have the mechanisms in place within your finance division, is considering increasing the frequency of the student counts in the formula. We currently look at that twice a year. There are states that look at it on a monthly basis. I think there are a couple that try to do it on a daily basis. But I think even going and looking at it as few as on a quarterly basis could benefit districts that enroll during the school year. And then conversely, if districts are not keeping their students, then they wouldn't they would lose that proportion of the funding if that student leaves and goes somewhere else. So I'd like to see whether, that you think that's feasible and worthy of a recommendation to the board. And then secondly, board members, I think we normally have public hearings. Public hearings are very important. It allows the opportunity for input, and I would suggest that we have a public hearing at the January meeting, prior to this committee meeting.
I think we are operating under that assumption, Ms. Dasty.
Thank you.
Any other discussion? We have a motion to receive the reports in a second. Is there any opposition? Motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is item 5.1 on page 115, consideration of fiscal dialogues as a result of the fiscal risk assessment process. The recommendation is to receive.
Do I have a motion to receive? So moved.
Second.
Mr. Lee and Ms. Bophy. Is there any discussion on this item? Any opposition? Motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is item 5.3 on page 120, consideration of contracts and leases of $50,000 and over. The recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion to approve? So moved. Mr. Lee?
Second.
Ms. Bophy, seconded. Is there any discussion?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Beebe?
I think I'm on the right item here.
5.3.
There's a contract to the new for the new teacher project.
Speak up if you until your mic, Ms.
The
Beebe.
new teacher project, the vendor is the new teacher project. I think it was last BESE meeting, we approved for it was $459,000 to that entity, I want to say.
What page are you on?
I'm on page 152, or am I ahead?
You're ahead of the agenda.
Okay. I'm on a different agenda?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, it's just keeping up with me. Slow here.
Yeah, this is on page 120.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay. You need a minute to look at that?
Yes, because I think it's sort of a supporting documentation, right? Let's see, I just want to find the other, should have marked it. Do that in future. I think it's all in, yeah, well, in fact, it's under 6.1, I'm sorry.
Yes, okay. So you okay?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Any other discussion? Any opposition? Motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is item 5.4. This is on page 124. Consideration of federal and state grants and allocations to LEAs, Type 2 charters, approved non-public schools, and community-based organizations. The recommendation is to approve.
So moved.
Ms. Bastu and Ms. Bradford seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Any opposition? Motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is item 6.1 on page 145, consideration of RSD contracts and leases of $50,000 and over. The recommendation is to approve.
Do we have a motion to approve? So moved. Mr. Lee, do I have a second? Do I have a second? Ms. Bradford? Is there any discussion? Ms. Hill?
I have two questions for the contracts, Communities and Schools of Greater New Orleans.
Speak up if you would,
I'm
Ms.
sorry,
Hill.
Communities and Schools of Greater New Orleans
Mhm.
contract, which we are going to be contracting, which is the amount is $60,000 to provide social services for the students. And then we have another contract, I don't know if someone is from RSD here to help me. We have another contract which is called Integrated Family Services, which is a $150,000 contract, which is supposed to provide similar, resources for both. So I'm trying to figure out why do we need two similar contracts to do the same?
They're in different schools. So one of them is 1003G money, which is federal school turnaround money for a specific school. That's Sarah T. Reed High School. The proposal from for Communities and Schools of Greater New Orleans is for Sarah T. Reed High School. The proposal for Integrated Family Services is for a specific, it's the Safe Schools, Healthy Schools grant, which is a specific federal grant. The fund comes from Safe Schools, Healthy Schools specifically for a citywide purpose. So one of them is for purposes of a turnaround through turnaround funds federally. One of them is through system-wide Safe Schools, Healthy Schools funds. and that's the vendor in that grant.
So with the integrated family services, they're going to work with all the RSD schools?
Correct.
Okay, and then this other grant is just working with Sarah T. Reed School?
Yes.
Okay.
Any further discussion?
Yes, sir.
Ms. Beebe?
I'm on track now. Page 152, the new teacher project. Again, it addresses professional development or teacher certification and recruitment services. But, I mean, the past meeting, we were asked to approve a $469,000 contract for this purpose. And it seems like we're getting it piecemeal, and why at this date? Because the date of services, and it's conflicting of 7/1 through 6/30. I mean, it's like a month span, and I'm sure that's just a typo. But,
I think it's 7/1 of 1 year through 6/30 of the next year.
well, it has 2000, you know, it's just a typo.
Okay,
But
yeah,
I'm saying
my
it's
apologies,
probably
yeah,
a typo.
I believe it is a typo.
But I just question the expenditure in light of the fact that we last board meeting approved a contract for $469,000.
And I-
It's RSD,
This is RSD.
and the other was RSD.
And I believe that those contracts, if they are different contracts, one of them was for the support of, I believe, teacher evaluation work in the RSD. One of them is for teacher recruitment in the RSD. This is a teacher recruitment finding that was to support the ongoing implementation of pathways. And I believe that that evaluation system grant was funded through the Gates Foundation, that original one we did before. So it's funded through private money. This is funded through Title I and is specifically for teacher recruitment into low-income schools. So there are two different functions, one of which is not even public money, and therefore this happened to be for the same organization.
So although we don't require the certification, teacher certification in charter schools, RSD, we are still promoting the certification of these teachers?
Well, these are in schools that are run by the Recovery School District, direct run schools, so there is certification required, yes.
Any further discussion? Any opposition? Motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is item 6.2 on page 154. Consideration of a request from the State Superintendent of Education for waiver of the RSD procurement policy. The recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Lee, do I have a second? Mr. Bennett? Is there any discussion on this item? Any opposition? Motion carries. Next item.
Your next item is item 7.1 on page 157. Consideration of BESE contracts and leases. The recommendation is to approve.
Do I have a motion to approve?
So moved.
Mr. Lee, second. Ms. Bophy? Any discussion? Motion carries.
This concludes your agenda for this meeting.
Admin and Finance is concluded.